Under the shroud of a dark cloud cover, two bombers cut through the icy skies, their engines roaring as they carried their fragile cargo. The engineless gliders suspended like ghostly specters beneath their massive wings. Inside those gliders, British soldiers, some barely 18 years old, others hardened by previous battles, sat in tense silence, their breath misting in the cold, waiting for the inevitable drop that would set them on their dangerous course. Their mission was clear, but the weight of its importance hung heavy on their young shoulders. They were to rendezvous with the Grouse Team, a unit of 4 Norwegian resistance operatives, to infiltrate the German-occupied Waymork hydroelectric plant. The plant held secrets vital to the survival of the Allies, a weapon deep within its basement that, if allowed to reach completion, could turn the tide of the war in Germany and Oppo's favor within months. Norway, like much of Europe, was already under the iron fist of Hitler and Oppo's regime. Jewish families were being torn from their homes, herded into concentration camps, and cities lay in ruins, the scars of war etched into the land. The stakes could not have been higher, but nature, as always, had its own plans. The sky above darkened, clouds swirling like the very hand of fate, and violent weather struck with brutal force. Ice shards sliced through the air, battering the bombers with unrelenting fury. The crew fought to maintain control as the gliders trembled and groaned beneath the weight of the storm. Then disaster. The cable tethering one glider snapped like a thread, sending it plummeting into the jagged mountain peaks below. The soldiers aboard had no time to react. The force of the fall was instant, brutal, and final. Moments later, the second bomber was caught in the storm's grip, veering off course before it too collided with the icy terrain, its glider crashing in tandem. The mountains, silent witnesses to the carnage, swallowed the wreckage whole, leaving only twisted metal and broken lives in their wake. In the cold, unforgiving silence that followed, the mission seemed to slip away with the lives of the brave men who had been so close to their goal. The tragic loss of so many before they could even begin was a bitter blow, but the war did not wait for grief. The Grouse Team, now reduced to a shadow of its intended strength, would have to press on without them, facing the impossible odds with nothing but their wits, their courage, and the memories of those who had fallen before them. The few survivors stagger from the wreckage, their bodies battered and broken, their faces pale with shock and despair. The icy winds of the Norwegian mountains whip around them as they try to find their bearings. But there is no escape. Their mission, which had begun with such promise, had ended in catastrophe, and now they had fallen into the hands of the Gestapo, Germany's ruthless secret police. The soldiers, once filled with the resolve of duty, now found themselves at the mercy of a regime that knew no compassion. Some were executed on the spot, their lives snuffed out like candles in the bitter wind. Others were taken into the heart of darkness, interrogated mercilessly under the threat of torture. The Gestapo, operating under Hitler's direct orders, showed no quarter. Under the Führer's decree, all captured commandos were to be executed immediately, with no regard for international law or the laws of war. The brutal hands of Nazi justice fell swiftly on the unfortunate few who had survived the drop, and death loomed ever closer, their fates sealed. With cold efficiency. Meanwhile, far to the north, the Grouse Team, for resilient men, remained trapped in the snowbound wilderness, cut off from any hope of reinforcement. The brutal Norwegian winter showed no mercy to those seeking refuge in its desolate heart. Every step through the icy terrain felt like a battle against nature itself. But the men pressed on, knowing that the fate of the world rested on their shoulders. They had no way of knowing the full extent of the disaster that had unfolded, nor how much longer they could survive in their isolated position. But their mission was clear. They had to stop the Waymork hydroelectric plant at all costs. Inside the plant, the Nazi war machine pressed forward, undeterred by the ongoing chaos. Under the watchful eyes of brilliant minds like Werner Heisenberg, Germany's nuclear ambitions grew more urgent with each passing day. Heisenberg, with his unparalleled expertise in atomic theory, had been tasked with the development of the Nazis' nuclear weapons program. And in Waymork, the production of heavy water, vital for nuclear fission, was moving into high gear. This molecularly altered form of water slowed the speed of neutrons, the particles responsible for splitting uranium atoms in a chain reaction. This was the very foundation of an atomic bomb, a weapon that could change the balance of power forever. With every passing day, the Germans moved closer to realizing their terrifying vision of a weapon of unimaginable destruction. The process was slow, the dangers immense, but the implications were clear. If the Allies did not act quickly, the world would face a weapon capable of ending the war in the most catastrophic way imaginable. The mission that had started with such precision now hung in the balance. Death had already claimed many, and the Grouse team faced an impossible task in the mountains. Yet even as the Nazis grew closer to their goal, the war, perhaps against all odds, was far from over. The flickering hope of resistance still burned in the hearts of those who had sworn to stop them. With sufficient heavy water, the Nazis could regulate neutron emissions and ignite a chain reaction of atomic division, a process that could be the key to unlocking the world's first nuclear bomb. The Allies were terrified by the prospect, a weapon that could devastate entire cities, altering the course of history in a single strike. The stakes were higher than ever, and the clock was ticking. Determined to prevent this catastrophic future, 6 men leapt from a British aircraft into the frozen wilderness of Norway. At just 23 years old, Joachim Ronneberg led the group, a team of elite Norwegian specialists trained in stealth, hand-to-hand combat, and expert marksmanship. Their mission was simple but deadly. Find the Grouse team, the surviving members of a previous operation, and together, sabotage the Waymore plant's heavy water production and storage facilities before the Nazis could harness its power for their nuclear ambitions. Each man was lightly armed, carrying only what was necessary for survival and combat. Their skis were essential for navigating the brutal terrain of Telemark, Norway, where the snow-covered mountains and unforgiving cliffs could easily become the team's tomb. Each man also carried a suicide pill, a grim precaution for the event of capture. For them, surrender was not an option. Failure meant death, and death meant their mission would be compromised, jeopardizing the future of the war itself. Ronneberg and his team pressed forward, navigating the frozen cliffs and treacherous slopes, their skis cutting through the snow with the grace and precision of seasoned warriors. Days turned into nights as they scoured the icy landscape, searching for any trace of the Grouse team. They had no way of knowing whether their comrades had survived the brutal winter conditions or if the mission had been lost forever. But Ronneberg, with the resolve of a man who had faced impossible odds before, refused to give up. The fate of the world was in their hands. Miraculously, after days of searching, Ronneberg and his men finally discovered the Grouse team, alive but on the brink of exhaustion. Their food supplies had been long exhausted, and they had survived only by hunting reindeer and foraging moss. Their spirits, though battered, were unbroken. Together, their forces now combined, the two teams prepared for their most critical mission: to infiltrate the heavily guarded Waymore hydroelectric plant and destroy its vital heavy water production and storage facilities before the Nazis could use it to build their atomic bomb. On the evening of February 27th, under a fading sun that cast long, sinister shadows over the mountains, the Gunnerside team took their positions. The hydroelectric plant loomed ahead, a formidable fortress nestled on the far side of a steep ravine. The most obvious route to the plant was a narrow bridge that spanned 700 feet above the icy Mana River, flanked on both sides by steep, snow-covered cliffs. The bridge, however, was heavily guarded, and crossing it would be suicide without a plan. Floodlights swept the area, casting long beams across the bridge and revealing the Nazi patrols stationed around the perimeter. Mines had been laid along the path. An electrified barbed wire surrounded the plant's defenses, creating a nearly impenetrable fortress. The team knew that the only way to succeed was to move with absolute precision, using the cover of darkness and their expert training to slip past the guards undetected. Every move had to be calculated, every action deliberate, for one mistake could cost them everything. As the night crept in, The Gunnerside team prepared to make their move. Their hearts pounded in their chests, but their minds remained sharp, focused on the task at hand. The world, it seemed, hung on the outcome of this single, desperate mission. The future of the war and the fate of countless lives rested on their shoulders, and they would not fail. A direct assault would be suicide, so Ronneberg devises an alternative. He leads his team away from the bridge, opting instead for the treacherous path into the ravine. With ropes in hand, the commandos rappel silently into the abyss, moving closer to their target with every calculated step. The team wades through a shallow stretch of the icy river, their movements slow and deliberate as Nazi guards patrol the cliffs above. Frozen grappling hooks are hurled upward, securing onto the cliff's edge. One by one, the commandos climb the sheer, frigid rock face. Reaching the top, they find themselves near a railway that leads straight to the plain. However, German guards are stationed at the gate. Ronneberg and his men, armed with intelligence gleaned from covertly obtained blueprints and guard schedules, bide their time. At midnight, as predicted, the guards swap shifts. In the brief window of confusion, the team silently cuts the lock on the gate and slips into the facility and Oppo's yard undetected.